So Israeli terrorists, popularly known as Israeli Defense Forces, have continued to showcase their savagery both in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. These human animals, savages, have targeted another hospital in Gaza, killing many innocent men, women, children, and babies. And they have also continued to wreak havoc in the occupied West Bank and its city of Jenin in particular. Quoting Bashir Matahin, Director of Public Relations and Media in Jenin Municipality, Al Jazeera reported that Israeli forces have bulldozed more than 70% of the city's streets. More than 70% of city's streets have been demolished, destroyed, completely damaged by Israeli forces. And that's the occupied West Bank, where there is no Hamas bogey. And there is no 7th of October attacks nonsense. And you know what the State Department headed by the war criminal Antony Blinken has to say? I sent pointed questions to Blinken's office. These questions were, can I have a quick reaction from the State Department on the ongoing Israeli military offensive in the occupied West Bank? Does the US support this blatant violation of the international law given that the West Bank is an occupied territory? Does the State Department endorse Israeli crimes against the people it occupies? And are there American weapons being used in the occupied West Bank? This is what Blinken's office had to say. And I quote, "We recognize Israel's very real security needs, which includes countering terrorist activity in the West Bank. At the same time, we continue to insist that Israeli authorities take measures to protect all civilians from harm. We also remain deeply concerned about maintaining stability in the West Bank and continue to urge Israel to take all feasible measures to protect civilian lives in the West Bank. We refer you to the Israeli government to speak to their operations." The last bit here is very important. This is how the rogue Biden administration has behaved every time it couldn't defend Israeli war crimes. Usually they would vow to defend Israel for all its crimes. But when they are cornered by upright media individuals such as yours truly, they will ask you to contact the Israeli government for a response. Blinken forgets that he and other war criminals in the Biden-Harris administration have always spoken about protecting a nation's sovereignty. Not too long ago, Blinken himself was mourning how the fear of attacks from Lebanon's Hezbollah had forced more than 65,000 Israelis to leave their homes.
One of our primary objectives from day one, since October, was to do everything we could to make sure that this conflict didn't spread, didn't escalate, including and notably to the north, to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, and then maybe beyond. And so this too is a place of intense focus. And I think you have a paradox in this moment, which is that, at least in our judgment, none of the main actors actually want a war. Israel doesn't want a war, although they may well be prepared to engage in one if necessary from their perspective, protect their interests, but they don't want one. I don't believe Hezbollah actually wants a war. Lebanon certainly doesn't want a war because it would be the leading victim in such a war. And I don't believe that Iran wants a war, in part because it wants to make sure that Hezbollah is not destroyed and that it can hold on to Hezbollah as a card if it needs it, if it ever gets into a direct conflict with Israel. So on the one hand, no one actually wants a war. On the other hand, you have forces, momentum, that may be leading in that direction, and which we are determined to try to arrest. You have, as you said, Suzanne, 60,000 or so Israelis who've been forced from their homes in northern Israel. Israel has effectively lost sovereignty in the northern quadrant of its country because people don't feel safe to go to their homes.
This, the clown had said, was amounted to Israel losing its partial sovereignty. However, when you ask him about condemning Israeli action in undermining the sovereignty of Palestinians, he will have no answer. This is when the ICJ, International Court of Justice, has clearly stated that Israel was illegally occupying the Palestinian territories. This is the hypocrisy and double standard of this clown called Antony Blinken and his fellow war criminals in the Biden administration. Meanwhile, BBC continues to disgrace the profession of journalism. The organization funded by your money, my money, our money through license fee is not even pretending anymore. In its latest broadcast, the corporation's senior reporter stroke newsreader Clive Myrie, he began his news bulletin on the occupied West Bank atrocities as the day 2 of Israel's counter-terrorism operation. His words.
And on day 2 of Israel's counter-terrorism operation across the occupied West Bank, Palestinian media are reporting the number of dead has risen to 17.
Earlier BBC representatives such as Martine Croxall, Yolande, Knell and Annita Mcveigh, they at least attributed to such lies and nonsense to Israeli military or the government. On this occasion, Myrie said it as a statement of fact from the BBC. So clearly, there is no doubt that the BBC has ceased to be an impartial broadcaster and it has chosen to take a side in favor of Israeli war crimes. I asked Myrie on Twitter to explain whether this was his own decision or he was being coerced and forced to read out this controversial line by his bosses. He refused. So I have no option but to conclude that this was his own editorial call. If that is the case, then this is surprising and very, very disappointing because he was so moved by the Russian attacks on Ukraine that he was seen even crying during a live broadcast from Kiev.
Reports tonight. Our international correspondent Ola Gearin has the very latest.
He was also seen taking moral high ground by vowing to represent the people of Ukraine.
None of us are forced to come here. It's part of our job. We all feel that we want to tell the story of this war and tell it accurately and fairly. And that is really important because there is so much, I was going to use the word crap, but I might as well. There is so much crap out there that is misinformation, propaganda, nonsense. And what you're trying to do, whether it's the New York Times, Washington Post, Channel 4, ITV, Sky, the BBC, you're trying to be truthful to this story. And you're trying to represent these people who are having to cower down here. You want to represent them fairly.
But when it came to simply reporting the truth and not even representing Palestinians, he has chosen to embarrass himself. A massive shame for himself and the BBC. That's it from me. I am grateful to all of you for your support to my journalism on buymecoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that my journalism is worth supporting, then you too can consider being part of this movement. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.